In this collection of videos, we're thinking through how we understand and perhaps misunderstand the whole notion of salvation. In two previous videos in this series, we've been looking at the story of the Bible and the way the story of the Bible holds and showcases the story and meaning of salvation. And we've seen how salvation for the ancient Israelites meant rescue from Egypt, and salvation for the ancient Jews at the time of the Babylonian exile meant a new Exodus, meaning we'll be able to leave Babylon and go home to where we really belong. Because the great promises of creation and covenant were focused on the land and the temple, because the land and the temple were signposts towards the larger reality. Because God promises again and again in the Old Testament that he will fill the whole earth with his glory, which resonates with the picture of the temple. God fills the temple with his glory as a sign of what he wants to do for the whole earth. Think of Isaiah 11, where the whole earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Or the end of Psalm 72, where when the coming king has done justice and mercy for the poor and the oppressed, then the whole earth will be full of the glory of the Lord. And there are other similar passages. Those are the promises which are then held out before the people. And when we turn to the New Testament, we find again and again the New Testament writers telling the story of Jesus as the fulfillment of those promises. Perhaps the most obvious passage is the opening of John's Gospel, which many of us know only too well because it's read at Christmas carol services in the tradition in which I come from. And speaking as somebody who once upon a time had 4 children all at different schools, and I had to go to 4 different carol services, by the time you've done that, you know quite well, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made, and so on and so on and so on. And then the climax, corresponding to the climax of Genesis chapter 1, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And the Greek word for dwelt is the word which means he pitched his tent, he set up his tabernacle. This is the new Genesis, this is the new Exodus. Jesus is the place where and the means by which all those purposes of God have suddenly found their yes. As Paul says in 2 Corinthians, all the promises of God find their yes in him. And those purposes of creation, of covenant, of new creation and now new covenant, find their yes in Jesus. And the story which John's Gospel tells is a story of Jesus as himself, the true temple. He speaks, says John, of the temple of his body, all the way through to where Jesus then, in his last meal with his disciples, speaks about the indwelling of God's Holy Spirit as the promise to them. They will be heaven and earth people. They will be image bearers. They will be, in other words, rescued from everything which has stopped them being the human beings they were made to be, and they will be enabled to be God's new people for his new creation. And so the story of Jesus going to his death, the story of Jesus rising again from the death, are themselves the story of the new Exodus, the new covenant, the restoration of God's people, with the forgiveness of sins at its heart, that glorious liberating message. For so many, that's what salvation means, the shout of delight that actually all the bad things that I've done constrain and constrict me no more. They're not going to corrupt my future. God has dealt with them. And the story of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is a story of how God has done that in and through Jesus. This is where it's all going. Not, therefore, that we should then be taken away from the world, but that we should be God's people in and for the world. Jesus says in John chapter 20, "Receive the Holy Spirit, as the Father has sent me, so I send you." In other words, just as Jesus in John's Gospel is the place where the new temple is set up, the place where the new covenant is happening, so by the Spirit, Jesus' followers are to be new covenant people, new creation in themselves and the means of new creation in God's world. Not that it's simply all downhill from there, as though all the people of God have to do from the day of Pentecost onwards is just to do as they're told, and the world will steadily turn more and more into utopia, because this is the foretaste of something yet to come, which we see in Revelation 21 and 22, the ultimate new heavens and new earth. Because between the time of Jesus and the gift of the Holy Spirit and the second coming of Jesus to put all things right, the church is to be for the world what Jesus was for Israel, which, alas, and we often wish it weren't thus, means suffering, means persecution, means martyrdom. We see in the early Christian writings, think of a book like 1 Peter, that some early Christians are worried about this. Surely, if we are Jesus' people, we oughtn't now to be facing any problems. If Jesus has dealt with sin and death themselves, why can't we just have an easy life of it? And the answer comes no. The way to God's future is the same way as it was for Jesus. Jesus says, if anyone will come after me, they must deny themselves and take up their cross and be prepared to lose their life in order to save it. That is the way forward. It's the way it's always been. We see that going on in the book we call the Acts of the Apostles. And so the epistles in the New Testament focus particularly on the church as the new temple. Think of the letter to the Ephesians. The church is the place where God himself comes to dwell by the Spirit, so that out of the previously divided humanity, Jews over here, Gentiles over there, God is making one new thing. And in Ephesians we have the promise in chapter 1 that God's overall purpose always was to unite everything in heaven and on earth in Jesus, in the Messiah. And then in chapter 2, we see that this purpose was meant to flow out into the uniting of the human race in one single worshipping family, so that they become a body which grows, says Paul, into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom, he says to the puzzled people in the Western Turkey of his day, in whom you too are built into it, for a dwelling place of God in the Spirit. This is what it means that God was to come and dwell in and with his people, as a sign and pointer towards that ultimate reality where the dwelling of God will be with humans, so that the church itself is designed to be, and this is where the story takes us to where we are now. The church is designed to be the small working model of new creation, the pointer to the world that the God who made the world has rescued the world. The God of creation is doing new creation. The God of the covenant has renewed the covenant, has forgiven sins, so that salvation is this great reality which sweeps us up and says all the things you are most afraid of, and ultimately death itself, God has dealt with, and you are now called to be collectively, corporately, and individually people who, as they celebrate their salvation, are looking ahead to the time when, as St. Paul says, God will be all in all. We have several videos in this series on the whole meaning of salvation. Please feel free to click the link to follow and watch the next one.